that's kind of the format. So my name is Peter Jackson. I'm Chief Scientist at Thomson Reuters. We are a global news and information business. We're in very many verticals, including financial information, legal, tax and accounting, science, healthcare, compliance. And inside of those verticals, there are very many job roles that we're interested in. So you can imagine if we have people who are in energy and commodities, you might have people who are traders, you might have sales and marketing people, analysts. All of these people have somewhat different workflows. So we're very interested in the future of work. We're very interested in productivity, putting the right information in the right hands at the right time. We know that the face of work is changing, and we want to anticipate that. I think we all want to do that, and also we want to drive work into the future. And so I'm going to allow our panelists to introduce themselves. So we have here John Seeley-Brown and Andrew McAfee. John, please go ahead.
I go by the initials JSB. My current title that fits the future of work is Chief of Confusion.
That is a concise introduction. I cannot do better than that. My name
is a Twitter stream.
Wow. My name is Andy McAfee, and I do research and teach about the impact of technology on the business world, how it is affecting the way companies organize themselves and perform and compete. And I hang out primarily at MIT.
So, I think one of the things that's been on my mind for a while is, we have a sense that work is going to become more decentralized. But at the same time, I think we feel that business ought to be more data-driven. And in some ways, we can think of examples where it certainly is becoming more data-driven. A gentleman at the Belly Up on Monday night was talking about Zynga and how they use their customers through extensive A/B testing to modulate Farmville. And so my first question, which I'm actually going to give to Andy, is are those two tendencies, the decentralization and being data-driven, are they at odds, or are they, in fact, in some ways, harmonious? What are the sort of best practices in that area?
I don't think those two tendencies are at odds, but I think they're only about 2/3 of the story. So when I look at what technology, which is doing to the world of work, I see three main things going on, and two of them you identified. One is that we're turning out ridiculous amounts of data these days. Luckily, we're also turning out incredibly powerful technologies to help us make sense out of that data. So we have the opportunity for businesses in any industry you like to become a lot more what I would call scientific in their decision making, to do A/B testing, to generate and test hypotheses, to become a lot more analytical. We clearly see that going on, and we see companies doing things they flat couldn't do before. The second one, Peter, that you identify is companies are becoming a lot more, I would say, collaborative, and they're taking advantage of this weird 2.0 suite of technologies to let people self-organize, to let more spontaneous collaboration happen, to do things like take advantage of collective intelligence and the wisdom of crowds and to crowdsource. My favorite example here is Innocentive, which is a clearinghouse for scientific problems. If you in your lab are stuck, you post your problem on Innocentive along with the reward for solving it. Anyone around the world can download that problem without having to show credentials or expertise or be in the right job or the right industry, work on that problem and upload their solution. So we don't have to guess in advance where the expertise might lie to help us with our problems. So those are two of the three tendencies. The third one, though, is working, I think, in large way against this idea of decentralization, which is that technology is giving us the opportunity to orchestrate work very tightly with great precision. In other words, to make sure that we're designing a blueprint for how work gets done, and that our enterprises and our people are going to adhere to that blueprint with pretty great fidelity. So you bring up Zynga, which is a fascinating company in a lot of ways because they move so quickly, they grow so quickly, they seem to be so successful. One of the things they do, as I talk to the Zynga execs, is that they will redirect large portions of their workforce on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis based on what the data are telling them. So it is very analytical. It's the opposite of self-organizing, though. It's a very centralized, heavy-handed approach to organizing work. I don't think that's bad. I think that's good. And so I see these three forces all interplaying. To me, it's too simple to make a blanket statement and say that the world of work is becoming more decentralized, more networked, we're heading purely into an Elance economy. There are other things going on.
So, John, what do you think, particularly on the self-organizing kind of issue?
In a curious sort of way, the cloud enables us to globally collect data and globally distribute data. And I think that Zynga is actually a very simple example of a company that take Amazon, for example. Amazon is running experiments multiple times a day and doing all kinds of micro probes to do tiny adjustments and then kind of look at the response structure. You got to realize that Jeff is a quant. He came out of the quant field, so numbers matter to him a great deal. And the whole catch is now that we have big data, we can actually get interesting signals from in systems that have a very high signal-to-noise ratio, or high noise-to-signal ratio. So we're beginning to find information through data mining in ways that normally you'd think it'd be totally impossible. And then you can do that and distribute those insights instantaneously, even if you were kind of a global company. So, I see these things as really quite separate types of issues.
So, we're talking about gathering more data, we're talking about getting more information. I think sort of one of the cliches of our time is information overload, and how people are inundated with data, some of which is structured, some of which is unstructured. And I was just wondering, is that really true? Are people really overloaded? And are we using, people's cognitive abilities in total across the interfaces? So I wondered what you thought about that, John.
Yeah, I might take a relatively counterintuitive position on this, that we have our biggest problem is the information underload, not overload. Let me explain. For example, we all in this room feel stressed out with information overload. Okay? Some of us in this room are high-performance motorcyclists. Let me tell you, on a high-performance motorcycle, I am processing probably 100 to 1,000 times more information per second than I ever do in front of a computer. I never feel stressed out. Okay? Here is the reason why. Most of the processing I do is peripheral. It's my peripheral vision that's looking for, was there a leaf over here, or is there an animal move over here? Is there something that kind of doesn't make sense? I always go faster than cars because you want to have a chance to kind of look at the car as you come up on it, so it's not surprising you, so you maintain your peripheral control. So the trouble is we as user interface designers focus all our information, including your company, toward the center of our vision, to consciousness. We do not understand anything about how to design systems, because we don't listen to architects, of how do you do the landscaping, if you wish, for systems. So I think that we're going to have to rethink this game a lot to realize how are we actually using kind of subconscious information as well as conscious information. How do we actually craft the periphery of information, which is technically speaking, quite a different ontology to it than, for example, when I look at something this long, process through the fovea, everything is a predicate and an object. I can never see a quality without seeing an object. The peripheral vision doesn't see objects, it only sees qualities. A completely different set of mechanisms are at stake. And I can show you kind of information design systems we're beginning to design that honor the periphery as well as the center. But I want to kind of say that, the catch is we've focused our life on content, not context. The digital age is causing us to understand the deep interaction between context and content. Because now we can craft context as easily as we can craft content. This is what the digital media has brought us. It's one of the reasons why the remix culture has been okay. So finally, let me just say one last thing. Is a very interesting startup company is SocialCast that John and I studied. The SocialCast, somewhat of an overstatement, but they have decided to rule out all email. No emails allowed inside SocialCast. What do they do instead? They manage everything through the equivalent to Twitter streams. So they've moved from store and forward message systems to continual streams. Now here's the catch. That makes absolutely no sense at some level, except what you do is each person crafts his own or her own dashboards as business analytic functions that visualize these streams coming by. It's a complete new way to process information. Okay? And that's how they kind of stay in touch with things that are developing. And so when Tim, the CEO, decides to go out for lunch, don't bother to schedule a meeting. He just announces, I'm about to go to this restaurant. Guess what? Go to that restaurant. I mean, it's kind of a different way of operating. And I just think that, we're going to have to shift into different work practices and different ways of thinking about context versus content and different things of thinking about streams versus objects.
And Peter, I have never heard a physicist say, man, my particle accelerator is drowning me in data. I can't figure out what to do with it. They say instead, what's the phenomenon I'm interested in? What's the hypothesis I'm testing? What data do I need to go collect that? Great, I'm going to turn on these sensors and not other. So this notion of drowning in data is something that we feel if we don't know what we want to do. And I think increasingly we need to be a little bit clearer on what we're interested in. The world is throwing out whatever data we want to go address those questions. Let's go do that. In addition, I do think, as JSB says, technologists are starting to do a really good job in rethinking how they show us large amounts of all different kinds of data. The final thing that I use is my human network to tell me what's important and what's not. So I don't have, I think I have an RSS reader. I don't use it at all anymore for everything, for anything. My TweetDeck client throughout the day tells me via the people I follow when something interesting has happened or when something particularly good appears. That is my primary mode for filtering down the universe of information and only getting the good stuff out.
It's interesting to, I don't know how many people in the audience here, if you've tried something called Many Eyes. Many Eyes is a fantastic toolkit for visualizing data. Yeah. And the catch is, don't let somebody else visualize it for you. You actually visualize it yourself. So they have an incredible set of primitives that then you mash up, combine, and change in order to be able to visualize the data sets as you want to see them.
Yep.
And I think it's something that we ought to start experimenting more with, because the ability to render this stuff visually is going to become increasingly important. And when you get the right kinds of visualizations, you may not feel so overwhelmed. You may not feel like you're on a motorcycle.
I might find that thought a little distracting, but so, John, you and I both come from an AI background, and I think that certainly in the 80s and then into the 90s, I think there was this feeling that, well, work is going to be easier because we'll have these fabulous machines and programs that will be helping us in our decision making, and that those machines will actually embody expert knowledge, and there grew a whole sort of sub-industry, I would say, predicated upon that notion. And I wonder, Andy, given your interest in Enterprise 2.0, are we seeing a shift instead in which, in fact, the power tools are not the AI programs? The power tools are, in fact, the platforms that allow you to collaborate more easily.
I think we're very recently seeing a pronounced shift back toward AI, but not toward AI as it was being construed back in the days when you guys were doing it more full time. Like you probably know, there was an AI nuclear winter when the funding and all the interest kind of went away, basically because of the lack of real progress with artificial intelligence systems. And a new group of scholars came along and took a radically different approach and said, okay, we're not going to try to teach computers to be smart anymore, what it means to be conscious or have intelligence. We're going to take advantage of the fact that they can crunch massive amounts of data, they can do statistical pattern recognition, and we're going to see if that approach will let us make headway in areas like playing chess, in areas like translating from one language to another, horribly difficult human problems. We used to think there was something ineffably human about that ability, and we had to teach computers what it meant to be human to solve them. We don't. The best chess players by now, easily, by far, are computers, and Gary Kasparov characterizes them as $10 million alarm clocks. And he says, it doesn't make me feel any better to have gotten beat by an alarm clock, but the computers, the artificial intelligence systems we're making these days are intelligent in exactly the same way an alarm clock is intelligent. So that gives me some comfort that we're not going to head into this Terminator or Matrix universe where our machines decide to rise up against us, but they are encroaching very rapidly on things that we used to think we had a comparative advantage on. So how many of us watched Watson play Jeopardy in February? Any nerds like that in the room? This is astonishing, right? This is an ineffably human task. You're going to listen to Alex Trebek read you a question, very often coded in some kind of pun, on any domain of human knowledge, trivial to fairly deep, and you have to spit out an answer on it very quickly. Watson beat the best humans in the world and beat them by about a factor of 3. This is something new under the sun. Google has built a car that actually drives without accident or mishap on normal American roads in traffic. So computers are chipping away very quickly at the stuff that we used to think we were good at. This has profound implications for us as knowledge workers. I'm a little bit worried about my future as a knowledge worker. I'm not worried that I'm going to become a battery for some computer like we saw in the Matrix movies.
Right. So let me just add to this, this notion that it's very hard to understand when you up the amount of data that you have access to by a factor of 1,000 to 10,000 times. What starts to become very doable that seemed utterly impossible just a few years ago?
Yep.
So let me give you an example that everyone in this room, I bet, has experienced. Most of us are bad spellers. We use the spelling algorithms inside Word or Microsoft or whatever, and almost never does it kind of understand the words I'm trying to spell. I'm probably a very bad speller, as Susan would tell you. But but what do? We immediately turn around and we go to Google, and we type the word in, and Google always nails it exactly.
Okay. JSB, did you mean the following?
Yeah,
thank
right,
you.
Okay. Do what I mean, not what you said. I mean, it's a beautiful example of massive amounts of data that are used to kind of guess what that word really was. And the Microsoft algorithm is a smart algorithm, but it has a microscopic amount of data. And so I'm just saying, you take a stupid thing like spelling, up the data by a factor of 1,000 to 10,000, and suddenly things become miracles.
And think what a happy development that is, because honestly, for the first time, and I think this is very recent, our computers are saying, Andy, is this really what you meant? Because if so, then I can help you with it. Right. Whereas before, we had to really shoehorn our thinking into exactly what the computer wanted, was geared to help us do. And if we couldn't, we were the dumb ones. And very abruptly, if my computer can't figure out what I want, it's now the dumb thing, not me. I find this a really happy development.
Yeah, I really have to agree with that one. Going back to this notion that we're depending more upon our colleagues and our peers, whether they're within the organization or externally, that sort of, to me, brings us to the notion of talent. So I think that very often we put a lot of effort into attracting the right talent to a company or an organization. And then if the talent shows signs of being restive, then we do a good job of retaining them and sort of say, well, what would it take? But I think, John, you've written about this recently, this question of, how about developing talent in between, those two endpoints? And I wonder if you'd like to speak to that.
Well, both my colleague John Hagel, sitting in front of me, and I have kind of defined something called the Dilbert paradox. We all still watch Dilbert. Why are our corporations still living up to almost all the cartoons we watch all the time? And talk to any CEO and he said, oh, talent really matters. Okay, oh, sure, it really matters. HR department does a pretty good job of that. What's going on here? Why can't we actually take this seriously? When we started the name of the session, my buzzword was going to be, how do we transform the workscape into a learningscape? How do you actually think about the corporation as the site for developing talent, the talent of all of us, not just the executives, but actually the people on the line as well. Wherever the rubber hits the road is an amazing opportunity to actually learn something, because things are always going slightly wrong. One of the real uses of social media is to handle the exception conditions that always come up in industry.
Exactly.
So we don't take seriously, how to kind of honor the workscape as a fundamental learning scape. I don't mean a training scape. I don't mean go off to corporate training. I mean, how do we create the freedom? So a simple little example, a favorite company that I study a great deal, but in bad terms these days, is a company like Toyota. It's very interesting. If you go on the assembly lines of Toyota, they hire basically only college graduates on the assembly line. If you're a top-level engineer, it is considered an honor to be sent to the assembly line to help figure out a problem. Okay, it is not a booby prize like it used to be in General Motors. Okay, being on the line where the action is kind of where you get to do the best kind of creative thinking of what just went wrong. How do you fix it? Okay? The kind of problem solving that goes on, and I spend time on the lines. I mean, I feel like I've just entered kind of a ballet, a choreographed ballet. To see how people work together when things go wrong, and how much they kind of think about how to make this thing better and better and better all the time. Simple little example. Toyota creates, the plants that I study, 2 hours break between the shifts. 2 hours break. Now, we're talking about $5 to $10 billion of capital assets that are sitting quiet. Okay, why? Because they want time for the people on the line to go off and have meetings to figure out what they could have done better that day. Okay, that is a company that takes talent development seriously. But my last kind of thing is, as we're moving into a global economy, how do we structure the partnerships that we create in our own companies in order to learn through those partnerships? Because basically we learn with and from each other, both in the company, but we have a fantastic opportunity to learn from others. So one tiny little story, I won't mention the company, but a very major American company is now struggling. Ran into one of the top engineers in Bangalore one day, if you remember the time, and he'd come over to explain how to build something in Bangalore, because they have a place in Bangalore. And he'd been there for 2 or 3 weeks. And we met him at the airport, and I said to him, well, tell me, what did you learn in the last 2 or 3 years? And he looked at me and said,
that's an unfair question.
He didn't even say it was unfair. He said, no, John, you got it wrong. I came here to teach. And I said, I know that's why you think you came, but did you learn anything? And he said, oh, no, I'm the teacher. And it was pathetic. Okay, I mean, that was a prime example of saying, like, that company did not take talent development seriously.
My single favorite quote about leadership is from Nelson Mandela, who says that the job of a leader is to find everyone's spark of genius in the organization, which is it's just such a lovely way to talk about it. And we have a toolkit now that lets people manifest their spark of genius to their peers, to their bosses, to their colleagues, to the enterprise as a whole, to the internet as a whole, like they never ever could before. Unfortunately, when I talk to a lot of senior management teams at mainline companies and industries, I get this profound sense of reluctance or fear to deploy these tools that give people a voice and are a lot more kind of weird and egalitarian and democratic. So I was feeling snarky a while back, and I went to this blog. This is a serious blog. A guy, for some reason, collects corporate mission statements on his blog. Right? Where do people get their time? So he's got this massive collection of corporate mission statements from the biggest companies in the world. So he's got a search box on it, great. So I typed in, people are our most important asset. Right? Can you imagine the dump of companies that I got back? See, we all know them, the most prestigious, best-run organizations. And I typed in empowerment again. I got another dump of, on the headline mission statement of some of the world's biggest and most profitable corporations, these terms appear. And I said to my, ill-defined audience, look, if you believe this, then what's incumbent on you is deploying tools and approaches and philosophies on top of them that are going to that are going to empower people to be your most important assets, let them solve problems, let them teach their colleagues and what they're good at, and let their expertise and their enthusiasm manifest itself to the world at large. And we're getting there. The progress is slower than I personally would like, but we're getting there, and I find it a fundamentally healthy and optimistic development because I appreciate that Staples needs people to stock its shelves in its warehouses and its retail stores. That needs to be a job description. Not terribly sexy, not terribly intellectually engaging, but while that person is doing that, they can simultaneously be thinking, and they are thinking, and if we give them some vehicles to get that out there and let them interact with their peers and colleagues, good things will happen.
So let me build on that a moment. First of all, the database you just mentioned, I think, feeds into the Dilbert cartoons.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
But we don't take very seriously what we can learn from the gaming world. And I could talk forever about World of Warcraft and so on and so forth. But if you're a serious player in World of Warcraft, you quickly learn to build dashboards. You build dashboards that measure your own performance. You build those dashboards for yourself. Mm-hmm. Interesting question. What does it mean to take these dashboards that management creates to look over the employee base? How do you actually say, no, the purpose of the dashboard should be for the individual? So we begin to understand how we spend our time, because most of us do not have very serious abilities to reflect on how we're spending our time, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we actually construct tools to actually empower the individual to actually better understand where they're adding value and where they aren't?
But it's not an either or. We can have dashboards that accomplish both those purposes,
absolutely.
right? Because it's incumbent on management to monitor the organization.
Right.
But I want to pick up on something you said, which is that we are not taking nearly enough advantage of, I hate this term, but gamification mechanisms or ways to let people know where they stand in some kind of ranking or some kind of leaderboard. I was talking to some people at Tata Consultancy Services in India a while back, and this is a 200,000 person organization, largely based in India, doing big software tasks for some of the biggest companies in the world, primarily staffed by a bunch of young, very sharp Indian college graduates. And a while back, they set up an internal enterprise, just kind of a question and answer system, so that if you had a question about something you were working on, a Java question or an SAP question, you could float that up to Tata as a whole, TCS as a whole, and anyone around that organization could answer the question for you. You had to categorize the question, so you had to say to the enterprise, this is a question about Java, for example. The smart thing that they did was build in these reputation mechanisms, feedback mechanisms, all this stuff we call gamification. So if JSB answered my question like a champ, I could give him some karma, I could give him 5 stars out of 5 or whatever. And the last brilliant thing they did was set up leaderboards in all these different areas. And they learned a couple things. They learned, first of all, that the competition to get on a leaderboard and stay there was insane. And this meant a huge amount to people to be recognized as the leader in Java, for example, even if it wasn't part of their annual review with their supervisor. To become prominent in that community was a big motivation for people. And these people who were on a billable basis, so their time was being accounted for, they had to account for it. They would still spend extra time participating in these environments. The even weirder thing that they learned was a lot of the people on the leaderboard for Java, for example, were not hired for Java. The organization didn't know they had Java expertise, and yet here they were manifesting this ability and helping their colleagues out in ways that no one in the formal enterprise would have predicted. Why would we ever turn our back on these kinds of things? It makes no sense to me.
But you might even argue that the 20th century was characterized by our preoccupation with financial capital, financial rewards. Today, the workscape of today and tomorrow is driven by more of a balance between social capital, reputational capital, and financial capital. How do those things all play together?
And what the gaming world is teaching me is how much weight we human beings attach to that kind of capital. And I think my business school community has impoverished the dialogue by over-focusing on these incredibly well-designed compensation schemes that have got us into trouble.
I'm thinking this might be a good time to engage the rest of the players in this game. I think there's some pent-up energy and opinions and questions in the room. So we would love to hear from you. And I think this is a small enough room that you could state your question, and I will repeat it for you, just so you know. Yes, gentlemen.
Hi. So we have huge unemployment challenges. How does all of this play into that, and looking forward, where's opportunity, where's challenge, what does it do to the curve? We've recently seen, what seems like the return of piecework. We're back to the rag trade. And so, so there are types of work that can be, divided up. You take a chapter of a book, you take a chapter of a book, you take a chapter of a book, you translate it, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all these different breakdowns. People are becoming independent contractors. Living wage is a challenge. Put all that together.
That's some of the work that my colleagues and I are in the process of doing right now. It is the one area where I am actually pessimistic, because the flip side of our incredible gains in productivity is that we need less and less labor to accomplish our economic output. As I look at some of the things that are going on and I project them forward, we've all heard of peak oil, the idea that at some point we're going to start taking less oil out of the ground every year. My most pessimistic scenario is one of peak jobs, where in an incredibly advanced, technologically sophisticated economy like the one in the United States, at some point in the not too distant future, we're going to start needing less labor every year in absolute terms to generate more economic output. This is what's already happened in the manufacturing and agriculture industries. Manufacturing employs fewer people in the US every year and has more output every year. It's a productivity story. So I'm actually worried about that. What do we do about it? I think this is going to become a pressing question for us all to discuss. I see two broad approaches. One is trying to tamp down on this contract world of work and piecework and crowdsourcing and all of that. The other is to embrace it and to say, look, if we can have an entrepreneur give 2 people a part-time job, I call that better than one person a full-time job, and certainly better than giving that job to a machine. So I want to encourage all the kinds of innovation and entrepreneurship that are possible. My only hope for putting these people to work is putting enough smart people on the job of generating economic activity. They're going to find a use for at least some of these bodies. But as I say, I find myself pessimistic here.
So actually, I'm not as pessimistic.
We've been getting along so famously until now.
A particular reason and also a particular kind of solution. In a world that's relatively stable, you quickly run out of new things to do, and then the kinds of scalable efficiency that we really know a lot about really comes to play.
Yep.
Okay? In a world of constant change, as you move from what we call S-curves to exponential curves constantly change, the game is constantly being reinvented.
Yep.
Okay? Now, that suggests, of course, that it's the small startups on the edge that are really going to create all the action. Okay, well, that's the easy story. Maybe we have the notion of startups wrong, and maybe we have the notion of how to regulate startups wrong. Okay, so in terms of startups, we tend to think of a startup, if you're a Western company, a Western country, pardon me, as a self-contained entity. Okay, you do everything in that startup. Okay, and of course you have shadow industries behind. You use public relations and lawyers and . In China, there's an interesting difference. In China, startups build networks with other startups, and so they start out with a notion of networking. So you don't have one startup thinking they can do the whole game. You actually have a network of startups that collectively create brand new products. And that actually gets them thinking about how do you build these kind of loose coupled ecosystems that are amazingly flexible and capable of having adaptability in ways we never thought possible. We may have the wrong notion of the firm, and we may have the wrong notion of how to unleash startups. And the final comment I would make is look at the overhead, the bureaucratic overhead, the reporting scale of what does it take to, even if you decide to hire 2 or 3 employees. How do you actually cut that down a tremendous amount? We got to rethink that too. But I think that if you look at even the Silicon Valley as an ecosystem, that got it partly right, but it has not going the rest of the way in terms of building networks of startups and how they work together.
Pete, let me say one more thing on top of that, because I think this is such a crucial issue, and JSB hit some stuff on the head there. This is a debate that's gone back and forth forever, and if you read the history about economic projections, I distill it down to the great phrase by Joseph Schumpeter, which is at the heart of capitalism. He calls it creative destruction. Absolutely what's going on here. I look at the debate about are we going to run out of work for people, and the debate goes between what I would call front halfers who concentrate more on the creative part, and JSB just articulated that very nicely, and then there are back halfers who concentrate more on the destructive part. And there's been this endless list of people